Okay. So this evening, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. I'm really excited about this webinar for NCAP and our Independent Pharmacy Network. Our first speaker will be Ritesh Patel. He's no stranger to independent pharmacists in North Carolina. Ritesh is an owner, an entrepreneur. He's someone in business that I frequently turn to as an individual to ask questions. He's also the chair of NCAP's Independent Pharmacy Network, and he will be providing some welcome and opening remarks, and then he'll also be providing some closing remarks as we get to the end of this evening. Our second speaker will be Jim Rose. We're pleased to have Jim Rose. He's the president of the North Carolina United Community Bank. Mr. Rose is responsible for 31 full-service branch offices, 2 loan production offices with total footings of $3 billion. He has had over 30 years of experience in banking, primarily in regional management and credit management for community banks. After Mr. Rose, our next speaker will be Scott Sykes. He's a certified public accountant and a certified financial planner. He works with Sykes & Company. It's a premier accounting firm for independent pharmacies. Mr. Sykes has built a career around all areas of pharmacy, accounting, and tax with an emphasis on high-level advisory for pharmacy clients. He is heavily involved in the community pharmacy industry and is a frequent speaker and contributing author on pharmacy, accounting, and tax matters. Also with us this evening is Kyle Steele. Kyle is an attorney. He is the practice group leader with Wyrick Law Firm's Labor and Employment Practice Group. Mr. Steele regularly represents and counsels and trains clients regarding all state and federal employment law. He also advises clients and litigates cases before federal and state courts related to covenants, not to compete, trade secrets, drug testing, employment terminations and severance, employment policies, and other employment-related issues. Following Mr. Steele, I've asked Tony Solari, who is our NCAP lobbyist, to provide several comments on what he is hearing in committee meetings at the General Assembly regarding relief for pharmacists. Tony Solari owns Solari Government Solutions and has over 30 years in government, lobbying, and policy experience. In addition to his work with NCAP, he uses his master's and PhD in political science as a professor for the North Carolina State University. And then our final speaker is Dr. Franklin Roy. Franklin, a good friend of NCAP, is an independent pharmacist and entrepreneur. He currently serves as president for IndyCare Health. He is one of our state's healthcare business leaders and has extensive experience in both US and global markets. Franklin serves as co-chair for the NCAP Medical Cannabis Task Force, but I've asked him here this evening because of his experience with point of care and other collaborative models for lab testing to speak to his investigative work into COVID-19 antibody testing. So that's our lineup of speakers, and I will turn it over to Ritesh at this time.
Penny, thank you so much for coordinating this for NCAP and Independent Pharmacy Network, and obviously for all the independent pharmacies that are able to join. And I'm glad that you'll be able to record this so that we can pass this on for people that are still more than likely still in workflow and working today. As you said, this has been an unprecedented last 6 or so odd weeks, maybe a little longer for some of us, that we've never seen something like this before. And, you know, when we were thinking about what we should do for independent pharmacies and as, you know, as our regional heads were texting each other, you know, I think we thought the best thing we could do is, while all of us are busy taking care of our patients, who's watching our businesses, who's making some of those decisions. And, you know, most of our independent pharmacies today, you know, are staffed with, you know, less than 5 or 6 people, which means all hands on deck. And so I felt that this sort of a business forum will be a great way to let independent pharmacists know that there's different ways that we can hopefully bring different information, and not just, you know, the clinical relevance of what we could do as pharmacists, but also ensure that we're taking care of our businesses. So I really appreciate the lineup today, and we're going to have some amazing information that we can take home and hopefully get some good questions answered, especially in regards to our financial stability over the next year. So I will not take any more time, and I will come back a little bit later, but I'm going to turn it over to Jim. Jim's a great friend of ours, and my personal banker, obviously, but at the same time, he's done some incredible things for independent businesses all around North Carolina for as long as I've known him, for about almost 12 years now. So Jim, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ritesh. Can everybody see and hear me? Okay, very good. Well, when Ritesh called me about this, I picked up the phone and told my wife, I said I was so excited to get a chance to speak to a great group of pharmacists. And I said, but I wasn't sure if I was Ritesh's first choice or not. It sort of hurt my feelings. And she said, don't let that hurt your feelings. You weren't my first choice either. So that's kind of the way it started off for me. But no, I wish my chemistry teacher in high school could see me now. She said I'd never amount to anything, and now here I am speaking to some very smart pharmacists. So I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful to Penny for giving me this opportunity. I wanted to spend my time updating you on the SBA Paycheck Protection Program and the CARES Act, and what we believe is round 2 that will be starting, we think, on Friday. It's passed the Senate, the Congress is voting on it, and then we'll go to the president's desk. And so we think the SBA will flip the switch on Friday, we hope. We have an active portal that I have sent to Penny that has given us a little bit of a leg up. We've been able to really perform, I think, pound for pound better than the larger banks have. We've had a lot of frustration from folks who have banked with some very large banks over time, but really didn't have the relationship with the right folks who could get to the IT back office and the SBA group to be able to get things through. And my group, in the last 8 days in North Carolina, we've done over 1,300 applications, and we're working on another 400 or 500 in expectation of approval on Friday to move forward. So Penny has the link. It's that we have a sort of a link for VIPs like Ritesh. And so thank you, Ritesh, for introducing me to this group. And we'll be sending that email out to you if you care to apply through our portal. We'll take very good care of you. And I think you have my email and contact information through this. And even if you've applied at another bank, feel free to call me, email me with any questions. I just want you to get taken care of, because one of the things I want you to think about in this, Ritesh mentioned earlier, your employees, and I've had some very kind and generous people come to me and say, I'm still doing fine financially. Do I really need to take this out? And in terms of a loan, especially a forgivable loan. And I've reminded everybody, this act is just as much about your employees as it is about your business. You can't run your business without your employees, and yet they need the money, and it's a nice thing for you to be able to pay them for a couple of months and use the monies you might normally pay them for something else to sort of build a rainy day fund for the future, because we don't know what's going to happen. So part of the application process is you have to say that your business has been impacted by COVID-19. And even if you've seen your sales go up or they've stayed the same or whatever, you still know that everybody's dealing with this. There's supply chain disruptions. I can't think of a business that has not had some adverse impact from the coronavirus. And so, think about it as much as being a way to get earnings and wages to your employees as it is equally to help your business. And so I also shared with Penny on April 17th, the SBA sent out a frequently asked questions, and it's probably 28 or 30 questions that we're seeing frequently come up because this act was put together so quickly that we sort of have been building the parachute after we jumped out of the airplane. And so our goal has been to get the money in people's hands as quickly as we can. Bankers are known for dotting I's and crossing T's, but in this particular instance, we've been able to move a lot faster than we normally move, and the SBA has as well. And I think the reason that it was pushed out to the banking network is the SBA just does not have the staff to have a distribution network. They normally do $25 billion in loans in a year, and last week they loaned out $349 billion. So they did 14 years worth of work in about 8 days. And my team as well, we've done 25% of what we normally would do in a year of loan production in 8 or 9 days. So it's amazing what's going on, but I highly encourage you to take advantage of it. We'll share our frequently asked questions. We'll share our website link, the VIP portal, and then I will wait like everybody else and take questions at the end. And just thank you so much for having me.
Scott, do you want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
sure. Absolutely. Let's see here. Share my screen for a second. Right. And Jim, that was a great, great introduction there. You know, Sykes and Company, my name's Scott Sykes. I'm with Sykes and Company. We work with hundreds of pharmacies all over the country. So we are intricately involved in the pharmacy industry, pretty much from the accounting, tax, advisory, day in and day out. We're working with pharmacy owners like yourselves. And you can always ask us questions here at Ask Sykes at sykes-cpa.com. We've done quite a bit of webinars up to this juncture with the NCPA and other groups as well, with pharmacies, kind of going over the PPP and other options as well, small business relief. So I'm just going to take it off from what Jim said. You know, we're expecting another $320 billion or so to replenish the Paycheck Protection Program. Jim was mentioning Friday. So that's what we're expecting as well. You know, probably about 70% of our pharmacy clients we've seen thus far have been funded already with the Paycheck Protection Program. About another 30% are waiting on the sidelines here. And so if you're one of those pharmacy owners, we're obviously telling folks to go ahead and get in line now, get your application ready, and get in the queue, because once this funding opens on Friday, it's probably going to zip right through in a matter of days, I'm sure. And, you know, what did we learn from round one of the PPP? We saw a lot of applications were inconsistent among all the banks. Nobody knew the rules. There's no guidance. You can't blame the banks for this. But so, you know, generally speaking, the application was somewhat an easy process. You pretty much filled out a couple pages. You certified that you had been impacted by COVID-19, among other things, and put down your payroll cost number. And next thing you know, you've got a PPP loan in your bank account. Now, what we're gearing up as an accounting firm is we're gearing up for the forgiveness part. And I think folks need to understand that the forgiveness part is going to be somewhat difficult. It's not going to be as easy as the application itself was. There's still a whole lot we do not know about the forgiveness part. And you know, I'm going to try and squeeze in an hour-long presentation here in 10-15 minutes. But real quick on the application, assuming most people have already really been through this, but fewer than 500 employees here are eligible for the PPP. So most pharmacies here, the loan amount is 2.5 times the average monthly payroll costs. And the payroll cost was somewhat of a toss-up at the beginning of this program. But it does include, it has been clarified with those frequently asked questions, And it does include salaries, wages, and commissions. So we've been using box 5 of your 2019 Form W-3s. You're going to add in group health care benefits to that. That's paid by the employer, as well as retirement benefits paid by the employer, and then state unemployment tax as well. You do have to compensate and subtract out any compensation over $100,000 for any employee. You do not want to include payroll and income taxes here. And if you're paying wages under the FFCRA, the Families First Corona Response Act here, you do have to take those into consideration. They are not forgivable, and they should not be included here when you're doing your payroll costs. So you have to keep that in mind, because I know a lot of pharmacies, the FFCRA has been a big issue for pharmacies out there all across the country, as they're, having their employees call in sick or worried about being sick. So something to definitely consider. Now, these loans will be forgiven tax-free if you meet the criteria. So the criteria, you have to use these funds for payroll costs, health insurance, retirement benefits. Again, those are employer payments there for the health and retirement, rent and utilities and interest as well. A few points about this, rent is there's still a lot of uncertainty whether related party rent would be included in here. There's uncertainty on the utilities portion. The utilities in the law says transportation. Nobody really understands what that means. There's been no definition of what that means. If you're looking at the interest portion here, if you can use the PPP funds to pay interest, but only the mortgage interest is going to be forgiven in this situation. So you do have to keep that in mind. Now, the big kicker here is that at least 75% of the forgiven loan amount must be used for payroll costs. And so when you get funded and you start the 8-week period from funding, the 8-week period starts when you are funded. You need to start paying attention to that payroll and making sure that you're going to meet that 75% test here. Because if you're given the option for a tax-free loan or a tax-free money, you want to maximize that to as best you can. Now, there is some confusion on. Let me go back real quick. There is some confusion on payroll costs and what that's going to entail for forgiveness. We understand what it means for the application. They have not clarified whether that is going to still apply for forgiveness. For example, health and retirement benefits included to meet that 75% test. So that remains to be seen. Again, this is why we're saying the forgiveness portion is going to be a little tricky here until we get guidance from the SBA, which we do expect, hopefully, in the next week to 10 days. I sure hope so. Now, assuming you meet those tests, the loan forgiveness amount is reduced, though, if your number of staff decreases or your level of payroll decreases by more than 25% for any employee that's made less than $100,000 annually. And in other words, what we're seeing here is that, again, the law, the guidance we have up to this point is not very clear exactly how this is going to work here. So when you are looking at your number of staff, you have to do your full-time equivalents from the 8-week period and compare it to prior year, 2019 or 2020. And so if you're seeing a drop there, you definitely want to compensate for that quickly in this 8-week period, because you do not want to have a reduction in staff. Otherwise, you're going to be doing some more calculations and you're going to be limiting that forgiveness amount. And the same goes with the level of payroll. We've been able to determine pretty much half of how the number of staff decrease is going to work, but the level of payroll decrease is not clear at all from what we've been seeing. So again, waiting on SBA guidance here. So, just to reiterate, the forgiveness part will be tricky. It's going to be complicated. The whole goal here is to go to Jim, your banker, and say, Jim, here's everything. Here's all the documentation, all in one document that supports every eligible expense. And the banks can hopefully just, rubber stamp and get you 100% forgiveness, and you're on your way. Otherwise, it's going to delay the process, and the bankers are going to be slammed here in 8 weeks doing forgiveness. So you're not going to see a lot of help maybe from them as well. So it's just going to be a difficult period, as it has been up to this point. So just something to keep in mind here. This kind of gets a little more detail. I'm not going to get into this, but this is where you're looking at the reduction in staff. You do need to, if you have been funded, I will say this, you need to determine your full-time equivalents for the period 2/15/19 over 6/30/19 and 1/1/20 over 2/29/20. So you want to get those full-time equivalent employees per month, the average there for those 2 time periods. And then you're going to use those 2 numbers and gauge how you're doing over this 8-week period. A lot of the payroll companies have this information. They have these PPP reports now, so you can pull that information pretty easily. But that's what I would be doing right now, and that's what we're doing for our clients. If you have been funded, you want to stay on top of this reduction in staff. Let's see here. So again, there's many unknowns with this loan forgiveness. What eligible expenses are included? I mentioned utilities and transportation. I mentioned, the payroll costs portion. What exactly will that entail for forgiveness? We know what it means for the application, but it hadn't been clarified for the forgiveness. And I will say a lot of the banks here, we saw a lot of the banks kind of make their own rules and decisions on the application part. It's probably going to be the same way for the forgiveness part as well. So I would say start with your bank. When you get funded, start with your bank and say, hey bank, what are you guys looking for? What are you guys seeing as far as forgiveness? And what I'm going to have to provide, the documentation, the criteria that you guys have, and start there, because that's going to be your benchmark really. There is no clarification on how this $100,000 limit's going to apply. There's a lot of assumptions out there. There's a lot of interpretations, and a lot of them are probably right. Some may not be, but I'm waiting on guidance to see exactly how that $100,000 limit's going to work. We've heard some talk about prepaying expenses. We do not know. The law says you have to have, these expenses have to be incurred and paid. So if you're talking about prepaying expenses, a July rent payment is not necessarily incurred yet. So that remains to be seen how that will work. Again, once you get to forgiveness, the banks are going to be, administering this whole program, including the forgiveness here. So you will go to your bank about that. Any part that's not forgiven is termed out up to 2 years with 1% interest rate. Now, really quickly, we also have a lot of pharmacies that have done the EIDL program as well, economic injury disaster loans. Now, these have been a part of the SBA for quite some time, but they've actually fast-tracked it here. They've modified the application due to the crisis at hand. And the funding's exhausted here as well. However, another $50 billion is expected to be replenished on Friday when they pass the additional funding for the PPP as well. And that's going to be another $10 billion on top of that in grants. Now, again, this one's pretty straightforward to apply with, or to apply for, SBA.gov. Now, we're suggesting pharmacies apply here. You have no obligations to take the funds. But I would certainly consider applying. When you're talking about pharmacy, cash is king in a pharmacy. And when you're looking at getting another sizable chunk of money here with somewhat favorable terms at 3 3/4 up to 30 year, this is a pretty good opportunity for pharmacies to actually consider getting some excess cash, and there's no prepayment penalties if you do accept the funds. So, it might be prudent for a lot of pharmacies out there to go ahead and just apply for this and consider accepting some EIDL funds, in addition to the $10 billion in grants that are available. If you do apply, there's up to $10,000 you can get a grant that's tax-free. You do not have to pay it back. and it's based on your number of employees is what we're hearing now. So if you have 5 employees, you're eligible up to $1,000 per employee. Let's see, you can do the PPP and EIDL. That has been a question in the past. And I'm going to go ahead and touch on this as well. Loan forbearance, SBA loan forbearance. We have a lot of pharmacy owners out there have bought pharmacies recently with some SBA loans. This is a automatic program now as part of the CARES Act as well. And this is a forbearance of those loans. The SBA is actually making the payment for you for the next 6 months here. And so this could be some considerable cash flow for pharmacies out there as well, if you do have existing loans on the books. And if you have other loans on the books as well, conventional type loans, you should certainly can ask your bank about maybe even deferring that as well, if that's an option, if that's applicable for you. It certainly wouldn't hurt to ask. Now, we've been consumed with the PPP and EIDL, just like everybody else really, the past few weeks. And we haven't even gotten to the CARES Act tax provision and changes in here. But just to make a couple points about a few of these, you have payroll tax deferral options on the table here. There's a change in charity contributions for 2020. So when you're looking ahead for tax planning in 2020, certainly want to consider those charitable contribution changes. Student loans, you can pay your employees' student loans as tax-free to them, a deduction to the employer. Now, qualified improvement property has been changed. So essentially this says if you've made improvements to your pharmacy, to the inside of your building, of your pharmacy building, and for example, USP 800 upgrades that a lot of pharmacies have done, you can essentially write off all of that under bonus depreciation. And that's a change that goes back to 2018 now. So you're looking at some serious refunds there if you didn't take advantage of that. Excess business losses, business interest limitations, and net operating losses have been changed as well. And these changes simply mean that you need to go, if these apply to you, you certainly could go back and recoup tax you've already paid and get refunds as well if these apply to you. So we haven't really even gotten to this part yet. This will kind of be a stimulus part 5 or 6, wherever we are come the summertime for some pharmacies, but definitely some options out there. And lastly, I'll just touch the Section 139. You can pay essentially you can pay COVID related expenses that your employees have suffered. For example, if they're working out of the house, you can pay for their computer upgrades and that kind of thing as a result of this natural disaster. And that payment to your employees is tax-free. They do not pay tax on it, but it is a deduction on the employer side. So Section 139 may be pretty attractive for a lot of employers out there. Of course, tax season delay as well. We've seen that's a big cash flow change as well for pharmacies. Delays up to July 15th, including estimated taxes. So another cash flow injection really for pharmacies there. And lastly, I got to touch on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, accrual to cash accounting. We've still seen, this was part of 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we're still seeing pharmacies out there not taking advantage of the cash accounting method for tax purposes, which, it could be a major tax planning opportunity for pharmacies out there to get some refunds and to reduce their tax liability. So definitely a lot out here. It's been an exciting few weeks. It's going to be another exciting 8 weeks here as we deal with this forgiveness. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everybody. And Penny, thank you again for having me. And let me turn this back over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think I went back to, something that NCPA had taught me in our first, one of the first ownership classes that I took in 2008, that, the 3 things that you have to have with you is a really good banker, a really good accountant, and a really good attorney. So we've got the banker and the accountant out of the way. Let's switch over to Kyle Still from Wyrick Robbins. Thank you, Kyle.
All right. Thank you, Ritesh. And I'm going to get my presentation on the screen here real quick. Thank you for that introduction, and also thank you to Scott. Scott mentioned the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and how it's so important to pharmacists, because you guys are on the front line of these issues. And as an employment lawyer, I am going to just give us a brief overview of that law, because I know there is a lot of interest in this group among those issues, and it does interact. Some of the issues in it do interact with the CARES Act and the PPP, and so I'm going to highlight those things as well for you. Obviously, no surprise to everyone here that COVID-19 has had a substantial impact on business operations, and that includes on your relations with your employees. For the first 3 to 4 weeks, my entire practice group of employment attorneys was seemingly on calls all day. I think we touched almost every client we have, and they had questions about salary reductions, furloughing employees, and even layoffs in some unfortunate situations. Obviously, all of these things were focused on cash flows, things that small business owners really have to worry about. I'm going to just highlight the furlough issue, because that is something that is an employment concept that has been around forever, but not something that people hear about often. Last heard about it in a major way in the financial crisis of 08, 09, 2010. Furloughing is putting your employees on the shelf, so to speak. You reduce their hours either partially or completely until work is available. It's actually a very common practice in some industries. If you think about the construction industry, furloughing is a pretty standard practice where in the winter, maybe work dries up and their workers are not off the payroll, but they're not getting any particular work for that season, and they're allowed to draw unemployment. Both of these salary reductions and furloughs, as Scott referenced, do have an impact on the PPP loan, and so they're important to consider as you're making your plan altogether. I mentioned in the slide here that federal and state officials have tried to take some steps to alleviate the employee impact, and that's what I'm going to go through here just now. The topics I'm going to talk about just briefly are the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, which is part of the Families First Act that Scott referenced, Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, which is also a part of that law, tax relief for employers, and specifically related to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, not the PPP, because Scott's covered that so well. And then just a brief overview of some unemployment issues that employers are seeking a lot of help with at this point too. Okay, the first issue that I want to talk about is the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. Prior to the Families First law, there was no requirement that sick leave be provided to employees on a federal basis. The way this was dealt with prior to that was on a state-by-state basis, and many states, including North Carolina, had no requirement at all that sick leave be provided. That is no longer the case, at least until December 31st of this year, which is when the Families First Act expires by its own terms. So let's talk about which companies are subject to the act. It's any private entity or individual that's engaged in commerce or any industry or activity affecting commerce. That's the federal standard that they always use to invoke their commerce power. And it's interpreted very broadly, so essentially it would affect every employer and certainly pharmacies that are getting goods in and out of interstate commerce across state lines. The key here, though, is does the company employ fewer than 500 employees? And I'm assuming that for most of the participants here, that would be the case. So I'm not going to belabor the point. Some clients, when they have multiple operations and maybe they have employees over here and employees over there, they have questions about, well, do I merge those and things like that? But we can, if anyone has any specific questions, I'm happy to talk about that. Okay, next issue is which employees are eligible for paid leave. And it's clear in the law that it's both full-time and part-time employees that get paid sick leave. Do they get it for anything? Do they get it for the common cold? Do they get it for, you know, they're needing a break for other reasons? The answer to that is no. They must have a qualifying reason for the leave. And the law has set out 6 qualifying reasons. All of them are pretty narrow. And sometimes we've seen employers want to make them broader than they actually are. So I'll go through those 6 just briefly. One is that there is a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19 that prevents the employee from working, including telework. Well, there's 2 issues there. For employers that are allowed to have their employees work from home, even if there's an order telling folks they can't go out, which of course there is here in North Carolina, and there is in certain counties throughout North Carolina, if they're allowed to do their work, then certainly this would not apply. And as you all know on this call, there are exceptions to all of those orders. Pharmacies are accepted, so that normally would not apply. If the employee is advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19, they do qualify for the sick leave, paid sick leave that I'm going to talk about. If the person is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and is seeking medical diagnosis, then they qualify. And this is one of the ones that I've had some clients already try to overuse. Got a call from someone that said, well, hey, we have an employee and her son's girlfriend was diagnosed with COVID-19 and she's been in the house, so we've asked her to stay home and we're just going to pay her under this law. And we'll go through the rest of the prongs in a minute, but that particular person would not qualify unless she takes the additional step of seeking a diagnosis, which she should under these circumstances. And in that interim period, while she's waiting on the medical diagnosis, she would be paid, but she needs to actually seek the diagnosis, and the employer needs to have documentation of that, because as I mentioned in a minute, there are some tax relief obligations with regard to paying this out, and the government is going to require better documentation than an employer usually would have to give regarding sick leave. Okay, next area where a person can qualify for sick leave under this law is if they're caring for an individual subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine order. Again, we don't have to belabor that point on this particular call. This is one, however, that you may get a lot of employees calling in about. If the employee is unable to do his or her job, including telework, because he or she is caring for their son or daughter whose school or place of childcare is closed or unavailable, then they would qualify for the sick leave. And all of the schools in North Carolina are closed. A lot of childcare providers are closed, and so that is actually the area that we are seeing the most usage of the paid sick leave so far. And again, they have to be unable to do their work because of this. Included in that is a representation from the employee that there is no one else in their family or otherwise available to care for that particular child. And if the child is over 14, there has to be some sort of certification from the employee that no one else, excuse me, that the child has special issues that would require care at home to that degree. I think the assumption there is a 14-year-old more or less can take care of him or herself for the most part in most situations. There's another prong that other areas identified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and we haven't seen any guidance from that, but we will wait for that. But the key to consider when you have a request for employees related to COVID-19 is it has to fit in one of these narrow areas for the person to actually qualify. If they do qualify, what do they get? And they get 80 hours, so essentially 2 weeks for most employees of paid sick leave. This sick leave is on top of any sick leave that the employer already gives to employees. So if you have a PTO plan or a sick leave plan or even a vacation plan, you can't draw down the bank of those leave allowances for employees while they're using this. This is on top of all of those items. And as a result, we've had some employers interested in stopping vacation plans, accruals, PTO accruals during this pandemic situation as another cash saving device. And so I can discuss that if anybody has any particular interest. Part-time employees would just get the number of hours they would normally work over a 2-week period for paid sick leave. They don't get the full 80 hours. The other thing, major thing that the Families First Coronavirus Response Act did was expand family medical leave significantly. And I say it's significant because you may be familiar with FMLA or you may not. It's a law that was passed in 1993, and it only applies to employers that have 50 or more employees in a 75-mile radius. So I know for a lot of folks on this call, that's probably not the case. And you may not have a FMLA policy because you're not required to. FMLA normally before this law would apply if an employee had a serious health condition, if one of the employee's family members had a serious health condition, if the employee had the birth of a child, so on and so forth. But again, it only applies to employers with 50 or more employees. The Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act and the Families First Coronavirus Response Act actually expands FMLA, and it, for this particular purpose only, applies to any employer with fewer than 500 employees. So same threshold as the paid sick leave, but it is putting FMLA obligations for one discrete purpose on all of those employers. So this is a new thing that has caused some concern for some employers, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. The other thing is not every employee is normally eligible for FMLA, even if his or her employer has to provide it. You have to work for the company for a certain period of time and do a certain period of hours, usually to get FMLA. And now, for this particular discrete purpose, you only have to be at the company for 30 days and you're immediately eligible. So, which employees are eligible for this expanded Family Medical Leave Act? It's, again, those that are unable to do their work, including telework, due to the need to care for their son or daughter who's under 18 and whose school or normal childcare is closed due to COVID-19. So the other areas would not be covered. The others that we mentioned, quarantine and things like that. But these, if you have the childcare issue, you get this expanded leave. To get into the details, what does this expanded leave actually provide? And it provides up to 12 weeks of paid leave. Now, this is another thing that's different from FMLA. Usually it's 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So if you have an employee subject to FMLA, she has a child, she by law can take 12 weeks for that, but it will be unpaid. She may get paid because of a vacation, sick leave, PTO, short-term disability policy, some other form, but the company is not obligated itself to pay. Under this law, the employee would get paid under certain scenarios. So the first 2 weeks would qualify as the paid sick leave that we just discussed on the last slide. For FMLA purposes, those first 10 days would be unpaid, but again, you're using the paid sick leave. The following 10 weeks of the 12-week allotment would be paid at 2/3 of the person's normal pay. That pay is capped at $200 a day and $10,000 total, but the employee would get paid by law. One thing about the FMLA, and it does apply to this particular expansion, it's job protected. So that means the employee cannot be replaced. He or she, if they're subject to this requirement, have to be given the same or an equivalent position when they return from the leave after 12 weeks. There is an exception for employers with less than 25 employees. So if you're in that boat, you are relieved from that particular requirement. Leave beyond 12 weeks is not protected, but there may be other laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, that could apply, but careful scrutiny would have to be given to that. And then there is a way for small businesses with fewer than 50 employees to apply to be exempt from this requirement if they can show that complying would jeopardize the business as a going concern. But as Scott referenced in other areas, the government is just overwhelmed in all of these things right now and is issuing guidance as soon as it can, but I have not seen particular guidance on that issue. So that is still, it's a chicken and egg thing, to apply for an exemption, but we don't know exactly how qualify for that. And the obligation has started already a few weeks back. So most employers are just going ahead and complying. Scott mentioned that employers cannot claim forgiveness under the PPP for funds paid out under the Families First Act, but there is tax relief under this law for those specific payments. I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but for those who are sick, the refundable tax credit, and this is really through payroll taxes is my understanding, you'll see that there is a maximum allowance per day, and in the aggregate, it's for 10 days. For the caring for sick children, for the sick or for your children whose school is closed, you'll see that it's 2/3 of the employer's regular rate of pay, up to $200 per day, $2,000 in the aggregate, and again, up to 10 days. So there is some relief, but what I've been telling clients on this is make sure that you have appropriate documentation from your employees that they actually qualify. For most employment laws, the government doesn't care if you go above and beyond the requirement, because that's coming out of your pocket and not theirs. Because there is tax relief available here, we fully expect the government to be more probing in whether or not the leave was actually applicable for the employee. And so you want to make sure that your documentation, you dot your I's and cross your T's there. I'm just going to briefly mention unemployment because for employers that have had to reduce hours for employees, oftentimes employees would have difficulty qualifying in North Carolina for unemployment assistance in that situation. But Executive Order 118, which was the executive order from Governor Cooper, where he essentially closed the dining rooms for restaurants, he also, with that order, expanded the eligibility of unemployment to qualifying individuals whose hours were significantly reduced because of COVID-19 reasons. He also loosened other restrictions like the 1-week waiting period, the requirement that the worker be available for other work. Usually a person qualifying or seeking unemployment has to show they're doing a job search. That may not be feasible under these circumstances, unfortunately. And if it is due to COVID-19 reasons, that particular part of the unemployment is not chargeable to the employer. And so you have to manage that with your PPP obligations. Obviously, Scott mentioned and Jim referenced that, these are for payroll expenses and you have to make certain levels in order to have everything forgiven. But some employers, when they're deciding, look, we've got to cut the workforce, at least temporarily, this is something that they're informing their employees about and helping them seek unemployment. As you've seen in the news, there's an unprecedented amount of unemployment applications. I believe the North Carolina Department of Employment Security is flooded with calls, and you may have heard either on the news or anecdotally that it is hard to get through there. But it is a good option for employees eventually if they're met with that situation. And that is the presentation that I have for you guys. I'm going to stop my share here, and I'll look for questions after the other speakers. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Appreciate the information, and I think that was very thorough, and I think most of us more than likely didn't realize some of those things applied to us and our small businesses. So thank you again. I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Tony Solari, our lobbyist for NCAP, and appreciate all the work that he's been doing over the last few months, especially trying to get us geared in making sure while we can't be at the legislative buildings that he has been representing us. Thank you, Tony.
Well, thank you all, and good evening to everybody, all the panelists and everybody listening. Those are great presentations, Kyle and Scott, very informative. And I wanted to say to Jim, I hope you sent that teacher a copy of your resume. Terrible thing for a teacher to say to a student that, you never amount to anything. That's just amazing. But well, I've got some information I'd like to share as well. And let me share my screen with all of you. And let's see if I can find the right one here. There we go. And tell me if at any point you can't see any of this. First, I want to take you to I take it you can see all this? Okay. We talked to the Chamber of Commerce, and we asked them to try to get on this webinar, but they basically have been inundated. You can imagine hundreds and hundreds of requests for this kind of thing. And they said to me that, well, Tony, we couldn't figure out like who we would say yes to and who we would say no to. But what we wanted to do was we figured our time was better spent creating a website that folks could get a hold of and with a lot of resources. So what they were kind enough to do is they walked me through this website. If you go to the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce and click on their coronavirus resource guide, you come to this page. It's full of great information and resources for you. And let me just take a minute to kind of walk you through that. So they're going to have a series of upcoming webinar briefings and webinars on a whole list of issues. So they're going to be talking about U.S. Small Business Administration, relief sources for small businesses, response and recovery, legislative updates from elected leaders, and so forth. So you can familiarize yourself with those NC Chamber of Commerce webinars that'll be coming up. Very informative. Here is a complete list if you're interested. Kyle referenced the stay-at-home orders and so forth. Well, here's a complete list of all the executive orders the governor has enacted. So you can get information there on that. This is examples of what businesses across the state are doing to go above and beyond to help all of us and their employees during this crisis. And it's a kind of list of all that's going on there, that if businesses are thinking of doing things, or if you're doing something for your employees, you can go there and get some ideas, or talk about what you're doing and give other folks information about what you're doing to help with the crisis for citizens or employees. There's state of North Carolina updates, just kind of from a variety of sources. Again, all the executive orders, what DHHS is doing across for us in the state. Here's federal assistance. So, we've gone over this. So
Tony, I don't want to interrupt you, but I don't want you also to not be aware that right now we're seeing a Word document on your computer, and it sounds like you're referencing a website.
I am. So let me, I I think what I've got to do is, hold on a second. I need to unshare and then share again, I believe. So give me just a second and I'll do that. Thanks for letting me know that. Can you see that now? The screen?
Yes, that's the right
Very
document.
good. There we go. Sorry for that, folks. So what I was doing is going through the NC Chamber. Here's a view of all the various things. So upcoming briefings, stay-at-home orders. You get to this by going to coronavirus resource page at the North Carolina Chamber website. All the good things going on, state of NC updates, but you can see they pop up. And here's a list of some of the things we've talked about: the federal paycheck program, coronavirus aid relief, and economic security. And so there's all federal assistance that you can find. Here is for our small business resources in North Carolina. And so one in particular, there's two things I want to call your attention to. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a Save the Small Business Fund. And it's funded by corporate and philanthropic partners of the chamber, but it provides loans, grants actually, up to $5,000 to small employers who employ between 3 and 20 people, and it gives you all the information you need to apply for it by clicking right there. So there's another potential source of help for small businesses, which I know a lot of our pharmacies are. There's federal coronavirus tax relief. There's a whole list of all the resources available to you. One here I want to mention too so I don't have to talk about it later. The Golden Leaf Foundation, in response to the crisis, had put a $15 million fund. It's called the Rapid Recovery Loan Program in response to the crisis. They ran out of money in about just a few days. North Carolina General Assembly, as part of their response to the crisis, is kicking in another $75 million initially. My guess is they'll probably raise that amount, but there's going to be another $75 million kicked into the Golden Leaf Foundation's Rapid Recovery Loan Program. So it'll be gone through the Golden Leaf Foundation, but you can apply for it by clicking right here. And again, a whole slew of other resources that we don't need to go over again, Small Business Administration and so forth. So you've got that resource available to you. Personal protective equipment, something I'm going to talk about in a minute when we talk about the General Assembly. Sources of personal protective equipment that you can access. They tell me this is updated regularly. Monitoring the COVID ID. Business continuity planning. Here's a resource for a lot of our pharmacists who may be, kind of struggling and thinking about how to kind of maintain continuity of business through this crisis. A whole set of resources here as well. So I just wanted to make sure I went through this with you. Remote working tips and so forth. So Chamber's got a lot of resources for you that really run the gamut, I think, overall of resources available. So let me make sure I get this time. So I'm going to stop the share on that and pick up with the General Assembly. Make sure I get this shared. Can you all see that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so General Assembly is working on two fronts. One, there's an economic support group, the COVID-19 House Committee Economic Support Group. They're working on unemployment issues. So there's, as was mentioned, there have been a number of changes to the North Carolina Unemployment Insurance bill. The federal government is supplementing our unemployment payment, which can be up to $350 a week, by I think the amount of $600. And so the General Assembly is waiving the accrual of interest on payment of corporate income and franchise taxes. This is not done yet, I should say. This is a draft, but this is to give you an idea of where they're headed. They're going to provide additional flexibility to administer unemployment compensation but for employers, changes to the unemployment insurance laws. And so all of these are in the works. We'll update you. Again, I'll say that these are draft. As you can see, they're bill drafts, so it hasn't been passed yet. General Assembly they're moving very quickly. And so both on economic support for North Carolinians and businesses and on policy changes, they're working quickly to get these bills done. They're going to come back on April 28th, 29th, and the first couple of days of May to enact this legislation. So we should be able to see the $75 million to the Golden Leaf Fund, these kinds of changes and other policy changes very late in April and early May. So again, I just want to stress these aren't enacted yet. They could be changed as they go through the process. And we'll be sure to, once they're done and signed, we'll be sure to give you a synopsis of what additional aid is available through the state. The main amount of aid that they're talking about is the $75 million right now. Let me go to one other document. I want to talk about policy in addition to the money, because policy is an area where we have been really, NCAP has been very, very active, really under Penny's leadership, and Ritesh and Franklin and everybody else who have really kind of been working on this. So the House has a committee it's a health work group. And the health work group, Penny and I are in touch, and I take it you can see this screen too, I hope. So Penny and I have been in touch daily, and when the crisis came about, you know, I'm a person. I know this may sound odd in some ways, but I'm sure you've heard it before. The crises can provide you with opportunities, right? And I'm trying to make sure I find the right slide here so you can see what I want to refer to. What are you seeing? Sorry for this glitch.
You're currently showing the top part of the letter that went over to Representative.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to find here as well on my screen. But at any rate, well, let me go ahead. So that the COVID-19, the House COVID-19 work group on health has been meeting. And as I was saying that, you know, Penny and I talked and we realized that, you know, that's a work group that we ought to be involved with and pharmacy ought to have a voice in front of. So we contacted the work group and through Representative Sasser, we were able to get on the committee agenda last Tuesday. And can you see the letter?
Yes.
Okay, so we contacted the committee. Penny was able to speak to the committee about the role that pharmacy can play in the crisis, but that we needed, pharmacists needed some additional flexibility. And so here's a copy of the letter that Penny had sent to the committee chairs. It's a follow-up letter to her appearance before the committee. And some of the policy changes we're looking to enact through the committee is a suspension of PBM and health plan audits and a dispensing and signatory protections, other dispensing and signatory protections. We suggest language for this. The ability to mail provisions dealing with the mailing and delivery of prescription medications. So the PBM organizations cannot in any way limit, hinder, or penalize pharmacies for providing mail order and delivery services. A key element that we know has been suggested to the committee and that has appeared in their worksheets. It's going to take, the point Penny made to the committee was, in addition to testing for the virus, right? In order to get North Carolina back to work, it's going to entail not only testing for the virus, right, but it's going to entail testing for the antibodies once an antibody test has been developed. And, but you're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not, a million or more tests being done. Well, clearly, doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers are they're not going to be able to provide that level of testing and administration of vaccines by themselves. Pharmacists clearly can do this. And so we are seeking the ability to administer tests for the virus and for antibodies, and to administer vaccines once one is developed or vaccines are developed. Additional mental health needs, to behavioral mental health needs, pharmacists shall be allowed to administer physician or advanced practitioner prescribed medications. Chronic disease collaborative care, so that pharmacists can assist healthcare professionals in managing chronic diseases. Personal protective equipment, we're asking that pharmacists and pharmacies be given a top priority. It looks like the state, one of the provisions the state is considering is to buy and stockpile PPE equipment, and that we would get priority in accessing that equipment. Another kind of provision that will allow for use of telehealth services by consultant pharmacists in assisted living facilities, and also access to any state-funded grants or loans designed to ease the burdens to businesses, to pharmacists by state loans. So, in addition to all the economic assistance that's being discussed, we took the opportunity to really kind of talk to this committee about the role that pharmacy and pharmacists can play in addressing the crisis. And those are some of the proposals we made to the committee. Again, that's a work in progress. And so we're actively pursuing that set of policy provisions. So that is largely what I have. And again, I apologize for the glitches in the screen sharing.
Thank you, Tony, again for the update, and I appreciate all the work that you do. Let's go over to Franklin and hear about the things that he's working on with COVID-19 antibody testing and what he's doing today.
Thank you, Ritesh. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. No, if this works. Are you seeing that okay? All right, so I'm gonna talk about testing, specifically rapid serology testing, and some considerations for independent community pharmacy. Testing is a big topic. I'm taking one little piece of it, which when we talk about rapid serology testing, this is specifically limited to the point of care antibody test. I would say this subject alone is probably worth an hour, so I've only got 10 minutes. But I put my contact information up there, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me to discuss anything in more depth about this topic. As you'll see in a minute, the FDA first put out a policy about rapid serology tests on March 16th. By March 19th, I think I was having the first conversation with a CEO of one of the testing companies. And I think since then, I've spent some portion of every day either researching, negotiating, acquiring, or talking to employers about testing. Our business, IndyCare, is a pharmacy-based clinic business. So we really look at care delivery overall, across pharmacists, pharmacy staff, the providers in the IndyCare clinic, and think about how to leverage those resources and assets to deliver care to the community. So I think that brings a kind of unique perspective when you think about some of the things like testing, because we're looking at it through the lens of pharmacists and the pharmacy and their staff, as well as the lens of our medical providers that are in the pharmacy, and thinking about the different dynamics of that. It also gives us an opportunity to be a little bit earlier in some things because of the medical providers we have on site that sometimes the pharmacy alone can't do. So sometimes we're jumping into these things a little bit early, and that requires us to really deep dive into some of the research. So if you've been paying attention to the news in the last few days, it'd be pretty hard to miss conversations about antibody testing. Most of it has been somewhat negative, I would say, over the last 4 or 5 days, particularly about the wild west nature of these antibody tests kind of hitting the streets and hitting the markets. There's articles from place in the US, around the globe, of people getting, shiploads of bad tests that aren't working. So it's going to be helpful to wade through this from the perspective of pharmacy, and some things that I think will help you to navigate this and think about what it might mean for your pharmacy. So I want to just go through a little bit of a timeline on some of the key things that have happened. I mentioned on March 16th was when the FDA released their policy on rapid serology tests. Basically, that policy allowed for the sale and use of these rapid point-of-care antibody tests prior to FDA review of the test under certain conditions. So this really created kind of a firestorm, or opened the floodgates of companies registering with the FDA to sell tests in the US, and just a frenetic level of activity to get the test. It also created a ton of confusion, because you can imagine when you say allow the sale and use of a rapid antibody test, most people, including myself, think that means authorize. As you'll see later in the policy, it turns out that's not true, in the timeline, I mean. So then on April 1st, we had actually the first rapid antibody test, an IgM and IgG combined test, received an emergency use authorization approval, and that test is being distributed by Celix, a RTP company. The test itself, unfortunately, was given a CLIA moderate complexity status, and that's because when Celix did a validation study of the test, they did not use finger stick capillary blood to validate it. They used a venous blood draw, whole blood, serum, or plasma to do the validation, and therefore it wasn't given a wave status. A few days later, now imagine we're 3.5 weeks since this March 16th policy announcement, and a ton of activity has happened. Tests are finding their way onto the market. Some people are starting to use the test. And on April 7th, the FDA published a clarification of their policy. And for the first time in that clarification, CLIA, the body that regulates lab testing, or at least assigns the complexity of tests and certifies labs, weighed in. And they weighed in and basically by default categorized all of these tests that did not yet have an emergency use approval from the FDA as high complexity tests. So we went from March 16th, where anyone and everyone in healthcare could do testing, to April 7th, where basically no one in healthcare could do testing. Because if you're not familiar with CLIA certifications, I would imagine there's very, very, very few even physicians' offices and probably almost no pharmacies that have a high complexity CLIA certification. So that, created a whole nother series of issues. A day later, Health and Human Services announcement came out authorizing licensed pharmacists to order and administer COVID-19 tests. And clearly HHS and FDA weren't talking to each other, because HHS didn't even reference anything about CLIA in their announcement. So that created, I think, a lot of excitement on the part of pharmacists, but also people like myself who were following this closely, a lot more confusion. A few days, or about a week later, we had the second test receive its EUA approval. This is from a company called Chembio. This test also got a moderate complexity designation. It's a multi-step test. It requires mixing blood with solution, applying it to a cassette kit, running that cassette kit through a device. So it's not, the typical point of care test that we all think of in terms of, blood sugars or pregnancy tests, flu tests, things of that nature. So still, most people and most doctors' offices and pharmacies unable to do that test. And so I just have out here as the last step on the timeline, the FDA emergency use approval of a CLIA waived antibody test. And it's just a question mark because we don't know when that's going to happen. I've been talking closely with some of the senior executives at some of the companies providing the tests, who thought 2 weeks ago they were imminently, about to get an approval. And it seems though that's not happening. And some of the insight we're getting is that the FDA seems to be prioritizing some of the more complex tests. You can imagine they are inundated with emergency use applications. So they have to have some process of prioritization. But that's where we're at right now. What does that mean for pharmacies? Well, what it means is, right now at this moment, there are no rapid antibody tests that you would be able to perform without a CLIA certification of at least a moderate complexity for the two tests that are approved, that are high complexity for the other tests. But let's, that time will come. We will see these wave tests start to get approved. So I think it's important to think about what are the opportunities for pharmacy and what role can we play in testing, specifically the rapid antibody tests. So when I think about the rapid antibody tests, there's three kind of ways that I think pharmacies might be involved. One is patient testing, right? So you have someone who's been sick and they want to get an antibody test. Certainly you could administer that to them. I do personally think that patient testing is a rather complicated area for the use of these tests. First of all, that's not really what they're for, right? Rapid antibody tests are not for diagnosing an active COVID-19 infection. They are for testing to see if someone has developed antibodies. So they're a little different, and to use it in a sick patient is complicated because, one, you've got to do a really good history on that patient because the tests themselves have terrible accuracy and sensitivity within the first 7 days after someone has been infected. I mean, I'm talking in the 30s, maybe 50% sensitivity. So there's a lot of risk if you're not getting a good history on the patient and testing at least 8 days from the start of their symptoms, because you can have a lot of false negatives. There's other complicating factors in patient testing from a pharmacy standpoint, which is that these tests are not yet, but very soon will be covered by insurance. And so a lot of patients are going to want to use their insurance because most insurances now are not charging them any copays, any deductibles for any services related to COVID-19. So there's a complexity there because as a pharmacy, how are you going to bill their insurance and get reimbursed for that test? So that's another complexity in the patient testing. A third one is going to be the access to PPE, right? If you're testing people who are sick or recently sick, you're going to want, respirator masks and other protective equipment to do that, which we all know is hard to come by. So I do think there is some role. I mean, every community independent pharmacy is different. Some have really advanced capabilities in the delivery of clinical services and seeing patients and might be more suitable for this. But if you consider right now that most of these pharmacies are closed doors, drive-through only, or curbside pickup, that's not a very easy environment to conduct a patient consultation, get an appropriate history, and use the test the way that they appropriately should be used. So what I see, and Tony alluded to this in his presentation, as a bigger opportunity for pharmacy is on helping businesses in your communities get back to work and using antibody testing as part of their strategy to have a safe workplace. Right, so a safe workplace, for an essential business or a business that's planning to come back, really involves a number of things. But there's three kind of things that pharmacies could help them with. So one possibility is on baseline testing and serial testing at some frequency, say monthly, of all their employees to continually monitor antibody status. Now, we don't know that having IgG antibodies means that you have immunity yet. And there's some debate about that in the medical community. The answer is we just don't know. But the principles of virology would tell us that if you have IgG antibodies, you, in all likelihood, will have some level of protection. How long, how much remains to be seen. So knowing that, if you're an employer, could be really helpful. As you manage a safe workplace for your staff, as you decide roles and responsibilities, who does what job, what risk level are there, who interacts with customers. Having those antibody tests can be really helpful. Another thing is in helping them with a protocol to clear people to return to work if they start to develop symptoms, or if they develop a possible exposure, like a spouse or a family member that gets sick. So you can incorporate testing with the CDC guidelines around isolation, no fever for 72 hours without use of medications. Other symptoms are improving as assessed by a healthcare professional. And then you can simply add an antibody test on day 8 to really strengthen that return to work protocol for employees. The other thing is, when you're working with employers on a program like that, it's going to be a cash model. So you don't have to get so tripped up in issues of reimbursement for the test and things like that. So I see it as a more practical opportunity for pharmacy in a way that you can really be a major instrument of help and change in your community to help those other businesses get back to work safely and bring the economy of your local community back on board. The third opportunity I won't spend much time on, but there probably will be some opportunity to get involved in surveillance. If you look at California right now, they're doing a massive rapid antibody testing drive. I think they've tested about 5,000 or 6,000 patients already to try to understand the seropositive prevalence in the population and understand how the disease is moving and progressing. So, if efforts like that start in North Carolina, I think pharmacies would be a great place to leverage to conduct some of that. So that's kind of how my thinking about how to use the test. Another big question might be, how do you get them? right? So there's all these tests out there. You know, there's more than 90 companies have registered on the FDA's site to supply the tests. So what are you going to do to get them? So the way I think about this is there's really 3 different options you have. Before I get into those, you know, there's some baseline assumptions, and these are more like rules than assumptions. These are a given, and this is what I've seen is that you can assume with great confidence that the FDA policy on testing will continue to adjust and change. You know, we may eventually see them approve at-home rapid antibody testing, for example. Something else you can count on is that the approval timeline for these tests is going to be unpredictable. You can also count on the fact that there will be faulty product on the market. You can also count on the fact that the supply chain is going to be unpredictable. And lastly, the prices to get the tests will definitely fluctuate. And I've only seen them fluctuate in one direction, which is up. So given those assumptions, you really have 3 choices, I think, of how to acquire tests. You know, option 1, which is the greatest risk, I said, just do it. You know, the tests are available. You can go ahead and buy them and wait and hope that everything sorts itself out and start using them once they're approved. That's a very risky strategy. And you know, every news article I've seen in the past 2 weeks about bad antibody tests, when you dig into it, the people who acquired the test pretty much use that strategy. The second option is you can try to move forward now, but after you've done some really good due diligence about the test. I'm going to go through with the due diligence that we go through and use, but what this enables you to do is to start to engage with testing companies, understand what they have to offer, understand the quality of that, where they're at in their EUA approval process, and take some level of risk and go ahead and acquire those tests now with the intention to use them once the EUA approval is in place. There's some risk there for you as a pharmacy, but the benefit of that approach is, if I refer to our assumptions about supply chain, at least you have a head start on getting the test and actually having them when the time comes to use them. The third option is you sit back and you wait until all the FDA approval process is done, and then you try to get those tests that have been approved. But I can only imagine the bottleneck and the difficulty of getting access to a test the day after it's gotten its FDA approval. So that's the lowest risk in terms of, you know, not getting burned as a pharmacy, but it's also probably going to put you in a difficult position to be able to implement testing when you're ready. The last slide I have is just, when I talk about due diligence, these are the things that we do as we engage with companies and think about acquiring tests, and that I would recommend that you do as well. So at the very start, I mean, you shouldn't be talking to any company that isn't at least listed and registered on the FDA website. Shockingly enough, you know, some of the governments, county governments in the US that have gotten burned on testing, bought tests that weren't even listed on the FDA website. The second thing is, I would strongly suggest that you look at a test that's already been approved in the country that it's coming from. You know, most of these tests are manufactured in China. So of those 90 companies, probably 85 of them are in China, but China FDA has only approved 11 tests, right? So when you got to look at a test that's already been approved by another regulatory agency, that gives you a certain level of confidence in the quality of the data behind that test. The third thing is just make sure that that manufacturer has at least submitted their EUA application, because if they haven't submitted it yet, it's going to be a long time before they're going to get an approval. Of course, you know, the fourth thing is you want to look at their validation study data. You're going to look at the sensitivity of the tests, the specificity, and importantly, the cross-reactivity data, because they need to be testing against other coronaviruses that are common. in the population to make sure you're not getting false positives. And sometimes there's other unique patient or process considerations that you'll see in that validation study. But again, if you're acquiring tests before they are FDA, EUA approved, you have to take that validation study data with a little bit of skepticism, particularly if it's a test that hasn't been approved in its home company, because all these companies have to do is validate, yes, we did a study and, you know, it worked. So then you get into things like, well, what's the company's reputation? You know, did they just show up on the scene with antibody tests in the last month? Or do they have a strong track record in diagnostics, in healthcare? Can you get access to their senior management? Can you talk to them about what their process has been on the test? Those are the sort of things that we look at and that we try to really do with any company we're going to do business with. And then the last thing, you know, outside of an FDA approval that you can look for that is really, really helpful is most of these tests are manufactured by one company, let's say in China, and they are supplied and distributed by another company here in the US. So sometimes that US company will go the extra mile and they will do some additional clinical validation of the test in confirmed COVID-19 patients in the US. So that is really, really helpful if you're purchasing before an FDA approval, because you get a second source of truth about the quality of that test and its validation. So that's the process that we've gone through. We have ordered and acquired tests from 2 different manufacturers from going through this process. Again, we don't have the time to go into depth about that here, but please get in touch with me if you have any questions about that, about this process or about any information at all. And on the last slide, I did list some helpful resources that you can reference. The first is a really good summary by Johns Hopkins of all the different serology tests that are available and good information about them. And then the following are some of the different FDA announcements related to this in terms of policy, frequently asked questions, and other information that you should definitely review before getting into any of the testing at all. So that's it for me, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, frankly, and appreciate all the hard work that you guys are putting through to getting ahead of the curve almost, to make sure that you guys are ready when testing is allowed. And obviously, like you being in a clinic is definitely helping us, stay ahead of some of the, things that are coming out. So I'll just very quickly say a few things, Penny, before we open it up to questions and answers, if that's okay. I know we're running late, so I really appreciate everybody sticking through this. I think we've covered some incredibly important information that most of us did not have the time to research. So we for sure appreciate, obviously, Jim Rose, Kyle Still, Scott Sykes, Tony, as always, and Franklin, thank you again for putting all these things together for us and giving us some good direction on, how to make better decisions as we move forward with this pandemic. I would like to quickly summarize what's happened, a little bit about what we're doing to try to get pharmacies, what Tony had sort of spoke about, but a few other things that we've done. I know the NCAP Board of Directors today voted on and approved to have a small work group to be put together to make sure that we create a toolkit on COVID testing, provide a checklist, a protocol, and a safety information to make sure that we have pharmacists that can do this safely and that they're ready and willing to provide these services for patients and whoever our vendors or our customers would be. I would like to add, Penny, if there is a way, I know this is really, really fast, but if we can put a certificate program to that, I think that would be pretty neat to have an NCAP certification program that would maybe even bring in some, testing capabilities and how to swab or how to, make sure we're collecting the right samples and things like that. Maybe there's some collaboration that we can do with the lab company or two. to give you a brief summary of what's happening in the legislature, and I know Penny's on a working group. I know Tony's been active. Wayne Sasser has been active. I know Danny Britt and Jay have put their Jay Chaudhry have put a couple of their 2 cents in there. But I know the state employee health plan has come to a lab company that Vinay and I know pretty well, and they had wanted to do, use pharmacists. And as independent pharmacy network representatives, we were able to tell the state to please use independent pharmacies as well as in network. And, we've sent out some surveys. I know Penny has sent out that survey again. It is not too late to fill that survey out. We're just trying to get some readiness and figuring out what, what we need to make sure that we address as we move forward in this uncertain times. And I definitely appreciate all the concerns that we have about, not only, when you only have one pharmacist in a store, or the things that we also heard about is if there's an elderly and or, immunocompromised pharmacist, what are we going to do to expose them to COVID testing? Obviously, PPE has been very big on our radar, and we are actively trying to source masks and other things, as not just as a company, but just overall to try to make sure that we have enough for our independent pharmacists to be able to tap into as we get some suppliers on board. So we'll continue to work together and make sure that we send out all the information. So I would like to conclude by saying sending information to independent pharmacies has been most probably the most difficult task, because we're still in the infancy of organization. As history so far has said, what we've had done so far is we've, since July 28th of last year, we've formed a group, we've created 8 regions, we've got regional heads that are doing some great job of getting the word out. This year, 2020, was really supposed to be a big year to ensure that we hope every independent pharmacy becomes a member of NCAP and obviously chooses Independent Pharmacy Network as a network that they're part of, which would make our jobs, that are, wanting to get information out would be very, very easy. So I encourage all of you guys that are on the call today to please call your colleagues and become NCAP members. Please make sure that you guys get your emails to us so that when we have information to send out, we can do it rather swiftly. Just to give you a quick idea of how we got the survey out this weekend on Saturday, we utilized NCAP, Arete, Epic, Cardinal, Health Mart Atlas, AAP Network, obviously mutual drugstores. And so I think we made most probably about 20 to 30 calls to these other players that obviously are very important in helping us, survive as a business, but we had to go to 30 different people to try to get a message out to independent pharmacists. So I feel like if we could really push our fellow store owners and pharmacists and pharmacy technicians in the independent world to please become members, that would be my biggest ask today, so that we can, really have this effort of, getting ahead of this, becoming, provider status approved, I guess, not just for COVID-19, but all these other tests that are available, and be able to do point of care testing and other things that we constantly dream of. I think this is obviously, I hate to call it an opportunity, because I know so many patients and so many people are suffering right now as we speak, but I think for our profession, this is a opportunity to shine and show the state, especially, that we're ready to be up there in the front of everyone like we have already. I know every one of us most probably have worked almost 7 days a week since this all started 6 to 8 weeks ago. And we've most probably doubled and tripled our deliveries and everything else that we're trying to make sure that our communities are served. So I just ask all of you to please reach out to your other store friends and hopefully become members of NCAP. So I will be quiet now and let Penny take over and see if there's any other questions that have come through for us.
I'll just say that if you have questions, please either raise your hand virtually, or you can type it into the Q&A, or even type it into the chat feature. And there was one question that was submitted by Jennifer, and I'm sure there are others out there that were wondering, and Franklin did answer it in the chat box, about which tests that he had vetted and purchased. Franklin, I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, or.
Yeah, sure. So we looked at a lot of tests. The ones we've ended up moving forward with is one test from a company called Innovita Biological Technology. They're a Chinese company with a CFDA approved test. They've partnered with two different companies in the US. One you probably heard of, Scanwell. And Scanwell is, working toward trying to get that test approved for home use. They also are working with a company called Gene 2020 Bioresponse, which is another laboratory diagnostic testing company that we actually had a relationship with already for some other tests. So that was one test. The other test is from SK Biopharma, which is South Korean biopharmaceutical company. Again, fortunately enough, this is a company that I'm familiar with from doing some drug development work with them years ago in Asia. They're a very reputable company. They have US offices, and they've got really strong validation data on their test, and they are distributing through Henry Schein in the US.
Thank you, Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a couple of questions that came up about slide decks, and I think all of our speakers are going to share the slides, hopefully with Penny, and so that we can ensure that we post it on obviously the IPN work group, or the I forget the platform that we have, but then also we could, I'm sure, email them out for people that are interested.
I would just jump in and make 2 points, one of which I made quickly on the chat. As some of you may know, Treasurer Falwell had contracted the COVID-19 virus and was in the hospital. And Representative Sasser tells me that he is very, very supportive of pharmacies being able to test and administer vaccines. Apparently, he had tried to go to get a test for the virus and was unable to do so. So he may be a very important ally for us. The other thing I wanted to mention, and maybe Kyle can speak to this as an attorney, is the General Assembly is considering a provision, the health work group, that says persons who are licensed or otherwise authorized to perform professional skills in the field of healthcare shall be provided blanket immunity from civil liability for the duration of the emergency unless a medical provider acts with willful and wanton behavior. And so I kind of thought when I heard Franklin talking about the tests and so forth and some of the risks involved, if that provision has an impact on that.
Yeah, I can speak to that in general, and I'm not familiar with that particular provision, and we'll have to obviously see what it turns out to be in a final text. Mm-hmm. But there are contexts in which legislators will carve out particular things from negligence laws or other liability laws. Obviously, there's an escape clause that if a pharmacist or healthcare provider acted wantonly or with gross negligence, and I can't remember exact terms that you use there, Tony, but that's an elevated standard of liability that you do see sometimes that says, okay, we understand the legal significance. That is, we understand that nobody's going to be able to do it exactly perfectly because we don't understand the situation completely ourselves, and so as long as you do your best and don't actively try to hurt people, you may have some lack of liability there. So that'll be interesting to see how it actually comes out when it's passed, for sure.
I was kind of thinking of it in terms of Franklin's point about, if you administer, let's say, tests or, and that test, you get a false negative, let's say. And, but, you did your due diligence to the extent you could, and the test seemed good. You administered as a false negative, limiting the liability might be something that would be of relevance, right? In case
Yeah.
somebody wanted to,
Yeah, for sure.
So Tara Jackson typed in something into the chat box, and then there looks like there's a Q&A that I'll go to in a minute, but Tara put, great job, everyone, very useful information. What are suggestions and or advice for being ready to go if and when pharmacists are allowed to test in some capacity? She also types in work on CLIA waiver, start thinking of area and pharmacy to designate as test area, to name a few. Also, are the test kit companies going to be responsible in training on use? And so I think she's beginning to think through maybe what are some roles for the association, as well as what are things that maybe the pharmacies and pharmacists within pharmacies could go ahead and be working on. So I don't know, Franklin, maybe that's a question for you, since you have more insight into the testing.
I'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'm sure Ritesh may have some thoughts too. So it depends what we're talking about. So if you're talking about the rapid antibody tests, there's very, very minimal training that's going to be required. You definitely should, if you don't have a CLIA waiver, go ahead and get that waiver submitted. I know NCPA circulated some information recently about filling out a waiver form. I think CPESN has done something similar. If the form is available online, I think it's called a CMS 1600 form, from recollection. It's not a complicated form to fill out, especially if you're just applying for a waiver. There's very, very little information that you need for that. Go ahead and do that now. It normally takes 6 to 8 weeks to get it back, to get your certificate back. And so, that's definitely a first step. You have to think about, one of the slides I put up earlier is, what do you think your role is going to be in testing? Do you think you're going to be testing patients? Do you think you're going to be working with businesses in your area on testing employees? Try to have some thought around that. And if it's going to be working with businesses, I would start to engage them now, right? And understand their interests, their needs. Are they going to want to work with you on bi-weekly, monthly testing? Because you're going to have to start to quantify how much tests you need. Because remember, supply chain it's like PPE. It's going to be extremely unpredictable. So it's too late to kind of determine I need 200 tests today and then order them tomorrow and expect them to arrive, in a few days. So it's helpful, I think, to figure out what you think you're going to be doing. If it's going to be working with businesses, start to engage them now. Talk about how the test can be used as part of a strategy to bring their employees back to work safely, and start to assess how much volume of tests you're going to need. And of course, start engaging with companies to be ready to acquire them. There are some companies that will let you order now, and they're not releasing the tests until they're FDA approved. So that may be one option. But there's a lot of other companies that, their tests are just flying off the shelf. For molecular testing, that's going to be a little different. If you want to get involved in that probably would take more training in terms of how to collect the specimen, how to package the specimen, how to ship it, what the turnaround times are, things like that. And maybe Ritesh, I know you're involved with that with Mako, so maybe you want to speak to that.
So I think, there's definitely a lot more questions than answers, more than likely, as we go through this. But when it comes to training, I don't believe the testing companies more than likely would have anything more, so that's why I was thinking IPN in conjunction with NCAP, come up, maybe even having Mako involved to do either a live webinar or a CE or something along those lines to make sure that we're, going through all different versions of the test. So, as he said, if it's a serology test, obviously it's just a finger prick. But if it is a swab test, then we need to make sure that we understand how deep we need to go and where and how and where and how it's packaged correctly and sent out, as he said. So, we are definitely putting at Mako, we're putting those plans together now to ensure that we're ready if these things are going to the pharmacies with a kit, to ensure that everybody gets an opportunity to ensure how to collect those samples. Because everything that Mako is doing currently involves collecting samples and nothing, being tested at the pharmacy. But that's a great question, and I think we do definitely need to stay ahead of it and make sure that we're prepared. Just like for vaccines when we started that, to ensure that we've got all the information and try to get everybody trained as quickly as possible.
Yeah, just one thing I would add too for the antibody test I just thought of is you'll have to also think about supplies, because most of the tests do not come with any supplies. And it's a finger stick test, but you cannot just take the drop of blood off the finger and put it on the test. You're going to need a sort of capillary tube, pipette type of supply in order to perform the test, as well as lancets, alcohol pads. So, just keep that in mind, because we had to do some searching around to get the right type of capillaries to actually do the test.
So we're a minute after 9. There are a couple more things that were typed in, and I'd like for us to try to just address that and then maybe close out for the evening, just in respect for everyone's time. So Melinda Travis had typed in about everyone's email. It looks like all the panelists have responded with their email addresses in the chat feature. So if you're interested in any of the emails, they've put those in there for you. Now, Jim Rose has sent me some follow-up stuff to send to all of you. And so his contact information would be part of that. And what I'll probably end up doing is posting some of that in the Independent Pharmacy Network that Jim sends, as well as maybe putting it on a resource page within our website or under the COVID general practice information. So just, there's a couple ways that I'm going to make it available to people that are on the webinar tonight. And then in closing out, the final question is coming in from Danny Barnes. Danny actually first posted a comment saying that the DHHS letter actually addresses waiving liability for healthcare providers. And so, so I know that that's, and something of great concern, but there is that DHHS letter that did come out that addressed that. But he also had a question, and again, it's another question regarding testing. Have you seen huge minimum order requirements for testing companies as states and municipalities, et cetera, are purchasing also? So I think he's asking, are you going to be able to order, like smaller amounts than like what a state would be ordering?
So far, the minimum orders on testing haven't been too bad, but all of this changes so fast. I mean, I had one company that originally I could order just a box, and 2 days later I had to order 10 boxes. So, what it is today and at this moment in time, it's hard to say that's what it's going to be, at some point in the future. But as of right now, you can get from some companies, smaller orders of rapid test kits.
And you saw that he was buying something from Henry Schein. So obviously on the clinic side, there's lots of people that have an account with Henry Schein, but I would imagine, Cardinal, Mutual Drug, all the wholesalers will have an ability to carry, just like they carry immunizations today, especially when it gets, really kicking fast. I would imagine their distribution lines will have for us to be able to, get these tests. But I think partnering with other businesses in the area would also help, be it LabCorp, be it Mako, all these different ones that are out there that I would imagine also will be part of the business model.
Yeah, and I should add, we have, I have been in discussions with Mutual Drug, and I have connected them up with one of the testing companies that we're working with to, I know they're investigating right now getting some rapid antibody tests potentially to supply to their member pharmacies.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much to each of our speakers. This was extremely informational and relevant and current, and I really appreciate everyone participating. To all the attendees that chimed in this evening, thank you for attending, and we hope that you were able to get information out. Again, I'll be in touch with the presenters for their slides, and you'll see information coming out for me shortly. Not tonight, but I'll be getting information out to you that'll give you access to this information. So with that, I'll bid you all a good evening, and stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully you'll take to heart Ritesh's plea to come on board as a member with NCAP and the Independent Pharmacy Network. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Bye, everybody.